Okay, Aaron Mack BS detector. Back. Keep reading. From the Tavistock Institute, Social Engineering the Masses by Daniel Eschelon. This is for the purposes of fair use and commentary and educational purposes only. Okay? Don't come for me. All right. One of the key areas of population control is counterinsurgency. Those familiar with the adage that nobody ever leaves the CIA except 6 feet under the ground may have wondered how such a control could come to be exerted. The answer lies in part due to the insidious methods of Dr. John Rawlings Rees and his Nazi predecessors. Peter Kuski explains, quote, before a potential agent has even been accepted for training by the CIA, he has already been effectively brainwashed during the selection. Rees's leaderless groups were, in reality, groups of candidates artfully manipulated by outside programmers in completely contrived and controlled situations. In 1946, Nathan Klein, who at the time served at War Shipping Administration of the United States, described an officer selection process that Rees personally set up for the U.S. Marines shortly after the war, end quote. And I find this timing to be real fishy, because the formation of the Shemina state of Yasharel was in 1948, is it? So, I mean, we're just like a year or two right before the formation of all that. How interesting. Nothing is coincidence in this world, people. Nothing. Okay? So, Peter Kuski, in The Shaping of the Anglo-American SS by War, explains, quote, 20 candidates were gathered together in a group and told their future as a squad, and the Marines was dependent upon beating the record of all other Marine units who had tried to solve the problem they were about to be presented. Then they were told to imagine they were on a deserted island and the unassembled life raft before them had just drifted ashore. With suitable appeals to their, quote, team spirit, they were instructed to break the record in getting the raft assembled and off the island. Quote, psychological warfare specialists standing on the sidelines observed carefully the approaches of each individual in the group to the problem. Did he immediately rush into trial and error mode of operation or stand back and size up an overall solution? Did he exhibit gung-ho enthusiasm and motivation or withdraw in alienation from the situation? Which man would move for leadership and manage to enforce group discipline and draw out team spirit? Quote, when they had tabbed their leader, a ruse was used, such as an alleged invasion on the other side of the island, to pull him out together with 3 or 4 others. This way, a new situation was developed where the psychological warfare experts could observe the rise of a new, quote, team leader. One purpose of these insidious and artificial schemes was to encourage mindless, quote, team spirit and to select the most rabid and competent, quote, team leaders. Another aim, when combined with the candidate's personal history, questionnaire, and other written tests, was to compile a, quote, psychological profile of each man for later use. And this just reminds me, like, this happens every day with even college football teams, okay? I was talking to my work friend the other night, and she was talking about this girl who was one of our customers that, like, legit, they were out at a bar, and this girl, someone literally just said something bad against the Georgia Bulldogs, okay? And anybody that's from Georgia knows that Georgia Bulldog fans are like rabid, psychotic people. I mean, they go in for their college football team. And somebody just merely said something about screw the Bulldogs, and the girl hauled off and punched the person. This is the brainwashing, okay? Bread and circuses, and they'll never revolt. Does that sound familiar? Quote, okay, wait. One purpose of these insidious and artificial schemes was to encourage mindless team spirit and to select the most rabid, competent team leaders. Another, okay. Okay, we already read that. Again, citing Peter Kuski, quote, it was still necessary, however, to destroy whatever real ego strength the candidate still possessed. This was the intention behind Rees's stress tests. One such test was used by John Gardner at the OSS. In this brainwashing scheme, the candidate was given 12 minutes to construct, quote, a cover story to be presented to interrogators who, quote, caught him stealing government documents marked secret from a government office in Washington. The candidate was told that this was a make or break test, encouraged to internalize a plausible new identity, and warned that his answers to his interrogators must not compromise OSS organizational security or blow his cover. Quote, When the candidate was finished thinking up his cover story, he was brought into a dark room, a spotlight blinding him, and 3 agents facing him. For the next several minutes, these brainwashing specialists would almost always tear to shreds the victim's hastily concocted cover story by various tough cop or good cop, bad cop methods, well-prepared staccato catch questions, physical brutality, etc. Almost without exception, the candidate was left dazed and confused. Then the brainwashing agents would abruptly break off the interrogation saying, quote, "We now have abundant evidence that you have not been telling the truth. That is all," end quote. After the interrogation board had ostentatiously engaged in some whispering back and forth would come, quote, "Your name is Jones, isn't it? It is our decision, Jones, that you have failed this test," end quote. Quote, "The crestfallen candidate was instructed to go upstairs. There, a staff member would pretend to commiserate emotions and fear in this pleasant atmosphere following the earlier great tension. Most of the broken candidates would readily open up and talk about their childhood in response to questions like, quote, "As a psychologist, I've been wondering whether there weren't times in your childhood somewhat similar to this, when you concealed petty things from your mother when she questioned you," end quote. Usually, the candidate would naively and pathetically ramble on about his mother, his early sexual experiences, etc. By this time, OSS not only had its desired psychological profile, it also had crushed the last vestiges of genuine ego strength in its victimized potential agent and was now in a position to manipulate and program him almost at will to cooperate with, quote, "the team." Quote, "The most up-to-date utilization of these Anglo-American SS brainwashing methods was unwittingly revealed by the Sunday Times of London on January 27th in an article about the U.S. Army Special Forces entitled, quote, 'New Secret Service,' end quote. The Times describes the counter-interrogation techniques now used." Yeah, and they say unwittingly revealed. No, nothing is ever unwittingly revealed, okay? Things are very carefully controlled and released at whatever proper time these psychopaths deem necessary. Quote, okay. "The 4-stage brainwashing program starts with testing for sensitivity of the nervous system through flashing words or symbols on a screen for fractions of a second. In order to find if physical torture or isolation and solitary confinement would better, quote, break him. Phase 2 is the breakdown of Troop's identity by teaching him how to develop a plausible alter ego or an alibi. The third phase involved brutal group attack or self-criticism sessions used to further destroy ego strength to supposedly simulate enemy interrogation, and the final phase, instruction and beating lie detector, involved, amongst other things, pairing strong electric shocks with ordinary everyday words. This technique, which would have obvious value for the CIA in preparing brainwashed veterans for hit squads, is described under its counter-interrogation cover as follows. These ordinary words acquire an emotional meaning for the man trained for a certain mission. Thus, in an interrogation with a mixture of control and conditioning, the man's response will appear chaotic and misleading," end quote. The OSS/CIA wasn't the only one using the latest and most up-to-date systems and techniques of counter-interrogation and agent indoctrination. Soon after, Tavistock developed newer, more and more sophisticated methods of mind control. Tavistock used various techniques of coercion, hypnosis, and the use of mind-altering drugs to achieve brainwashings for their victims, quote, "all of which applied to the same basic format: induce massive physical or psychological stress in an individual and then relieve that stress," end quote. Through repeated vacillations between stress and relief, the subjects, be they army recruits, intelligence agents, or general population, eventually became intensely suggestible. The OSS, quote, "pristine interrogation," quote, "darkroom," literally became the house of horrors for the newly selected recruits of the British MI6. One such secret location reserved for, quote, "special government projects" was at Powergen in Solihull, UK. The year is 1979. Quote, "The young British intelligent recruits entering this building had no idea the hell that lay before them," writes Richard Tomlinson, former MI6 spy who was a part of the program. Quote, "No idea that they would be forced to become slaves to a demonic mind control program run by MI6 and sanctioned by Royal Arch Freemasonry through Tavistock Institute. Freemasonry!" And then that makes me think of the other, oh God, the little thing that they did. It was out in California, and it was like in a prison, And it was like they signed all these people up for, you know, for some kind of psychological testing or whatever. And so they were actually put into imprisonment, and the tests were done to see like how many of them they could get to gang up on the other prisoners, how many of them would inflict torture upon another quote unquote prisoner. And none of these people were really prisoners. They could have said stop and walked out at any time, but none of them did. And I cannot think of the name of that program that they ran, but I'll have to try to look it up. And if any of you know, please sound off in the comments, because that ish was crazy. But it just goes to show like how suggestible people really are, even if they're not actually imprisoned, if they're just fake imprisoned, and the inhumane things that they will do to other people just because they're told to do it. It's wild, bro. It's absolutely wild. Okay. Okay. It was at Power Gen in 1979 that a 21-year-old recruit, Richard Tomlinson, attending his first inset British intelligence, was first shown a passport photograph of Vladimir Putin, supplied to him by one of Oleg Gordievsky's contacts. Gordievsky, the highest-ranking KGB officer to escape to the West, was a Royal Arch Freemason. Aren't they all? The course was run by Stella Remington of MI5 and John Scarlett, the overall MI6 controller of the modules. The two Tavistock design programs for British intelligence graduate trainees were 1. The MI6 Beast programming, and 2. Smelly Cheeses programming in conjunction with Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I don't even know what that means. The first one refers to the Beast computer program placed into every recruit's mind control programming during recruitment training at both MI5 and MI6. One of the tasks set the graduate trainees and mind control programmers who are running the Royal Arch Freemasonry course was a, quote, treasure hunt. The treasure hunt was to test their, quote, spycraft skills and general sadism. Part of this course was based on an old Roman game which the soldiers had played with their prisoners, the Rite of Saturn. In short, it was a sadomasochistic game whereby the recruits were tortured and abused in a similar fashion to the Roman prisoners. This was called the Via Dolorosa. And remember, Saturn is Yahweh, okay? We've established that too already. So, all you Yahwists out there praying to Yahweh and following his Torah, repent. Anyways, quote, Via Dolorosa was a Tavistock-designed water torture. The programmers and British intelligence bring to you a near-death experience in order to make you obey. It is also a way of separating the weak from the strong. The programmers torture the recruits repeatedly in order to break their spirit. The key, an initiate is worthless to them if they are capable of disobeying orders from above. Well, I guess I'd be useless then, because I think for myself and I ain't doing that. Some people never recover from the experience. Symbolically, this is the birth, death, and resurrection process. The stages of the cross. Most initiates are taken to Jerusalem to walk the Via Dolorosa in order to reinforce this programming. They have become Christ-like. And no, they have not. Unless they surrender their life to Jesus and then ask the Holy Spirit to form them in the image of Christ. Then no, they're not Christ-like at all. Smelly Cheeses is programmed in via the reading and enactment of Three Men in a Boat, a Jerome novel published in 1889. Quote, Chapter 4 of Jerome's novel relates how it is most important whilst traveling and carrying smelly cheeses not to touch the goods, nor afterwards once one has arrived at one's destination. All smugglers are most worried about the safety of their drugs or contraband, and therefore the importance of this part of the programming, end quote. In his self-published unofficial biography, The Golden Chain, Tomlinson relates that, quote, the other graduate trainee programmers were given huge electric shocks after training, i.e. the enactment of this little drama, and would then be instructed to sit on chairs facing a large window. This was, quote, relaxation to de-stress the brain. The young men would sit there and grind their teeth, a normal response to electroshock therapy, whilst gazing blankly at the sky. Mr. Blue Sky by ELO was sometimes played at this point to, quote, rejuvenate their spirits, end quote. Quote, the main point behind MI6 Smelly Cheese's programming was that prospective recruits to British intelligence were sent on gap years around the world on various missions, i.e. to courier contraband on British-dominated smuggling rings, which had their origins in the British Empire's, quote, snake lines, end quote, in clear reference to the Asian drug routes, especially African diamond routes. Quote, Smelly Cheese's programming was used in parallel with Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Why? As Tomlinson writes, quote, to encourage and train those who had been picked to remote view and then come back like homing pigeons when called by the programmer, end quote. This is all MK Ultra mind control. This is what it is. Fast forward to the late spring of 1980, Russian monastery compound, Ein Kerem, Jerusalem property of Russian Orthodox Church. Back in 19... And you see, it's always the Freemasons and the Jays, bro. It's always them that's behind all of this repugnant shit. Okay. Back in 1980, it was run as a nunnery, but was known to be a KGB spy center. According to Tomlinson, Vladimir Putin and the other KGB Royal Arch Freemasons stayed within this high-security compound. The British intelligence recruits mainly stayed at the, quote, youth hostel behind the St. John Church in the center of Ein Kerem. It is located partly up the mountain which overshadows the town, and it backs into a pine forest, end quote. What is mind-boggling in this upside-down universe of smoke and mirrors is that, quote, in the evenings, the graduates would sit on the veranda of these buildings with their KGB Russian counterparts to smoke, drink vodka, and shoot the breeze, end quote. Tomlinson spoke Russian and acted as a de facto translator for the group. Tomlinson explains that this was the first time that the future president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and the now former MI6 agent had met. Fast forward to 1993, Poland. With the Soviet Union disintegrating into oblivion, Poland became the world's largest flea market in the world of intelligence. Possessing large mineral wealth and large oil reserves, plus more timber than the Amazon, not to mention an immense stockpile of Soviet-era weapons, the country was being asset stripped. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The strategy was intended to topple Russia into anarchy towards the point where Russia could not oppose Western military operations. Quote, no one really knew who was working for which agency or which agency was allied to whom in what turned out to be a smash and grab gunfight. One could name MI5, MI6, the CIA, and the IRA, but a few in this free-for-all. The desperate dash to acquire information, drugs, guns, you name it. Just about every intelligence agency and mafia organization was in on the game, end quote. Everything was on sale. Truckloads of Soviet rubles motored down autobahns. Many were used in complex swap operations in which billions of narco dollars were laundered on behalf of the Drangheta, the Calabrian mafia. Numerous prime Western banks, such as the Bank of New York, Goldman Sachs, Fleet Financial, and Bank of Boston, looted up to $500 million. Tomlinson explains, quote, Vladimir Putin had lost his job as KGB controller of the Stasi in East Berlin. There was a famine in St. Petersburg, and the KGB owed their employees several months of salaries. Whole families were starving in the cities, and Vladimir Putin's own family was no exception to this rule, end quote. Putin needed help and reached out to the very people who supposedly were his enemies, such as John Scarlett, MI6 Moscow station. Like Putin, Scarlett was a Royal Arch Freemason. Tomlinson is unable to shed any light on the deal that Scarlett struck with Putin, but he does add several nuggets of information. Putin, according to Tomlinson, quote, had been under MI6 Royal Arch Freemasonry mind control since 1979 and had been one of their operatives within the KGB until 1994. Putin needed safe passage for himself and his family out of a situation in St. Petersburg, which was rapidly deteriorating. Scarlett had agreed to set up a new identity for him in the UK as a teacher of German, as Putin spoke German fluently. Putin's two daughters and his wife would follow him at a later date. However, somewhere along the line, Scarlett reneged on the deal. Instead of a safe passage out of Russia, MI5, for reasons unknown, had decided to torture and then murder Putin as soon as he set foot on British soil. But British MI5 underestimated future Russian President Vladimir Putin. Through his extensive network of contacts, he learned of MI5's real agenda and called the deal off, returning to Russia instead. In 1994, Putin struck back. This year, MI6 laptops began to disappear in Europe. Putin and his associates were tracking down the MI6 senior officers who held the color-coded information of the tailored mind control programs for their officers and agents within their laptops. Tomlinson explains that, quotes, once the codes are broken, it is relatively simple to control any of the operatives listed, as well as guess how to control the others who were indoctrinated in a similar way, and then to turn them against their masters. The main clue was to be found on an antique British typewriter, 55 Imperial 55, at the Jerusalem Prison Museum. Isn't it funny how there's always some J behind all of this? The code on the typewriter keys runs as follows. Number 1, $SV. Number 2, XDM. Number 3, KGB. Number 4, RKK. Number 5, AAN. Number 6, TYM. Number 7, ZKTZ. Number 8, NLT. Number 9, SKTZ. And 10, PF exclamation mark. The 10 sequences above accounts for 10 different branches of Royal Arch Freemasonry, infiltrated British intelligence departments, quote, from its inception, MI1, to the current public form of MI5 and MI6, end quote. For example, clue 7 is zygote, Zayin, Shet, Zadik, and Hebrew, which, in Hebrew, isn't that interesting? Which stands for the Royal Genome Project, and clue 9 is sex kittens, which is definitely MK Ultra mind control. They have a sex kitten programming section. They have all kinds of different. But Britney Spears, Katy Perry, anytime you see a butterfly associated with any of them, that's the MK Ultra sex kitten. Or if they wear like bunny ears or whatever. So like everybody on the Playboy magazine is MK Ultra sex kitten mind controlled programming. These departments are all still in existence today. The KGB Royal Arch Freemasons were one of these departments in this tarantula-like Masonic organization. The CIA wasn't far behind the British MI6 in their approach to brainwashing. The agency realized that the more maverick approach involved the role... Maverick approach. Interesting. There's a YouTube channel called The Maverick Approach. I just find that... my mind makes little connections like that. If you're a conspiracy person, then you probably already know about the channel. But anyways, let me stop. Okay, the agency realized that the more maverick approach involved the, quote, role of social factors in skewing the minds of the agents to the agency's needs. In other words, individual brainwashing tactics such as electroshock therapy or the use of drugs, though powerful, were no match for the power of suggestion and enforcing behavior, end quote. So Rees and his partners explored the deepest recesses of the human mind, adopting the object relations approach of universal literature, which emphasized imagery and symbolism rather than instinctual drives and psychic energy. Through the use of associated theory, the idea was to recreate the imagery world of an immortal piece of literature in the minds of the test subjects, using the work of art for immoral purposes. Under Rees and Tavistock, these techniques became a testing ground for new forms of institutionalized psychological control. The Blue Bird of Happiness. The, quote, land of memory has always been the primary objective of mind control and counterinsurgency operations. There is a phrase which is perhaps not used so much these days as it was in the tender years of the 20th century. Quote, the Blue Bird of Happiness, end quote. What many people do not realize, and did not realize even then, was that this term had its origins in The Blue Bird from 1909, the most famous work by the Belgian Nobel Prize-winning author and dramatist Maurice Maeterlinck. In this play, two children set off on a search for the Blue Bird of Happiness. This search leads them on many adventures, a kind of Enneatic quest for the Holy Grail. Peter Lavanda, in his brilliant book Sinister Forces, explains that, quote, many of the motifs in Maeterlinck's plays are repeated in the CIA's search for perfecting mind control, end quote. A search that began with Project Bluebird. The story, quote, which begins on Christmas Eve, involved two children, Till and his younger sister, Mytil. who set out on a quest to find the blue bird of happiness. Impoverished children of a woodcutter who live across from a great house with very rich children. They understand that they are too poor to receive Christmas presents that year. In the middle of the night, there is a knock on the door, and an old woman who later introduces herself as the fairy Berryloon asks them if they have, quote, the grass that sings or the bird that is blue, end quote. Berryloon has a sick daughter who will not get well unless the blue bird of happiness is found. The children, eager to help, set off on a quest for the mysterious bird and to visit their dead grandparents with the fairy's help. In order to visit the dead, however, they have to pass through the land of memory, which is on the way to the bluebird, end quote. I am taking my time to explain Maeterlinck's work in order to help the reader understand how secret societies, intelligence agencies, and governments use literature to indoctrinate their cadres into becoming mind control slaves to the elites. Bluebird is one such program devised by Tavistock specifically for the CIA. Just as in Maeterlinck's play, the recruits, quote, are given a magic hat. On this hat is a diamond set squarely in the center. When Till presses it, he will see, quote, the soul of things, end quote. If he turns it to his right, he sees the past. To the left, the future. And as long as he wears the hat, it is invisible. Those who read Eastern mysticism will no doubt grasp at once that the diamond is the adamantine substance, and its position on the hat is a reference to the third eye, which, when opened, gives the devotee access to secret information and occult powers. It's also kind of reminded me of like the Project Looking Glass type, whatever. All this stuff blends together, and it's kind of all, what's the word I'm thinking of? Kabbalistic. It's all Kabbalistic, Luciferian evil is what it is. The search for the bluebird will give Till and mind control recruits these powers as they walk through the land of memory, the palace of the night, a graveyard, and an enchanted forest. Eventually, of course, the children arrive back at their home on Christmas morning, where they discover that the bluebird of happiness has been there all along, end quote. However, for Tavistock, the play is full of occult and esoteric elements of necromancy, treasure quest. That children, virgins, are the ideal seers according to the occult text of the Middle Ages goes unmentioned. Didn't we just read about the occult text of the Middle Ages? The Talmud, the Kabbalah. Anyways, let's see. The moral is uplifting and spiritual, conservative and charming, a fairy tale replete with talking animals and trees and kindly grandparents. The quest itself, though, is enlightening for other reasons. The land of memory, of course, was the target of the Bluebird Project. To enter that land in another person's mind, to go through the drawers, rearrange the furniture, and leave unnoticed. Quote, once the Korean War started and American POWs began making bizarre pro-communist statements after a mysterious sojourn in Manchuria, the world was introduced to the concept of, quote, brainwashing, even though it had been going on for the longest, right? And the bluebird took on enormous importance. If the communists could alter the consciousness of American soldiers, then the war took on a completely different nature. It became a war of culture against culture, of atheism against religion, of race against race, of darkness against light, end quote. This was a war not to be fought by bullets alone. Psychological warfare operations were ramped up at the same time as Bluebird went into full swing. And what William Sargent would call in 1957, quote, the battle for the mind had begun. Tavistock had obviously known of Maeterlinck's creation, just as Lewin and Rees had known of his other more obscure works, or of his studies of astrology, psychic phenomenon, and mysticism. Maeterlinck's this is a typo, I guess, because it's been Maeterlinck and now they've added an S to it. Maeterlinck's description of the land of memory had to strike deep resonances in the minds of the Tavistock team as they embarked on their search for a key to the mysteries of human consciousness. And so, the mind control programming begins. Quote, in the land of memory, a strange land enshrouded in mist and darkness, the two seekers find their grandparents long deceased. Their grandparents tell them, quote, the last time you were here, let me see, when was it? It was on All Hallows, when the church bells were ringing, end quote. Quote, All Hallows, of course, is the Day of the Dead. They find a bluebird, but when they return from the land of memory, the bird has turned completely black. Only the first trial has taken place, and Tiltil and Mytil have much further to go. Quote, next stage in mind control is the Palace of the Night. It is a somewhat more eerie and forbidding place than even the Land of Memory. Night is depicted as a kind of angel, a dark lady with wings in place of arms. The Palace of the Night is the domain of ghosts, sickness, and wars. One goes directly from the Land of Memory to the Palace of the Night, from unlocking the secrets of the memory to communing with the dead, controlling sickness, and becoming victorious in war. Bluebird and its associate programs, such as MK Ultra, and often became involved in all aspects of behavior modification, hypnosis, drug-induced psychological states, and the creation of amnesia. So amnesia was a created thing. Quote, Tiltil finds a great door set in the rear of the Palace of the Night and is told that he must never open it. The great dangers await those who rush in, and that no one who enters that room ever returns to the land of the living. Tiltil, who is charged with the sacred quest of finding the Bluebird, finally decides to open the door. When he does so, he sees a beautiful garden, a waterfall, and many wonderful things, and of bluebirds. He tries to grab as many as he can, and when he takes them out of the room, they turn corpses in his arms. They cannot stand the light of day, end quote. This sessions continue, quote, both the brainwashing trainee and Tiltil must continue their quest, leaving the Palace of the Night for their next destination, the Palace of Luxury. Here they are confronted by a scene of outrageous depravity as fat beings eat, drink, laugh, and carouse, beatific in their willful ignorance. As always, Tiltil, with his magic diamond, secret knowledge not available to others, can see things as they really are, and by pressing the diamond he perceives that these beings are miserable fools, and thus exposed they retreat to the miseries, a special place from whence they may never return. Of course, the CIA specializes in, quote, seeing things as they really are, end quote, looking behind the curtain, behind the facade, and their entire program may be seen as Tiltil's diamond. They put the magic diamond to use to see the human mind as it really is, to strip away a human being's conscious defenses so that everything, every secret, even highly classified government secrets that could cost the lives of many would be revealed. Quote, from the luxury palace, Tiltil proceeds to the kingdom of the future. This is where he finds a land filled with children who are not yet born, dressed completely in blue, and like little scientists. They are occupied with the inventions that they will produce once they have been born on Earth. However, Tiltil, as a living person, is not allowed in this kingdom, which is under the rulership of time. From the kingdom of the future, then to the graveyard. Quote, this is much like any other cemetery with tombstones and grass and silence. At midnight, he is to use his magic diamond once again to see the dead. In the midst of the darkness and impending horror, a clock in the distance chimes the hour. Tiltil presses his diamond, frightened but willing to face the dead as the next in his series of trials before he can capture the blue bird. But instead of ghostly figures in shroud and clanking chains, the scene changes. The tombs open, but instead of ghoulish entities, only flowers emerge. Quote, they had thought that ugly skeletons would arise from the earth and run after them. They had imagined all sorts of terrible things, and then, in the presence of truth, they saw that all they had been told was a story and that death does not exist. The motto of the CIA, of course, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free. How fucking blasphemous of them to say that. From the graveyard, Tiltil wanders into the forest. During the quest, he has been accompanied by various other creatures who have been observing Tiltil from a distance. Many of these creatures, most especially the cat, fear for their lives should Tiltil be successful. The cat says, quote, it is better to rely on oneself alone. In my cat life, all our training is founded on suspicion. I can see that it is just the same in the life of men. Those who confide in others are only betrayed. It is better to keep silent and to be treacherous oneself, end quote. This might well have been the personal motto of some of the sinister men who worked behind the scenes at Tavistock and the CIA. Men like John Rawlings Reese, Eric Trist, CI Director Richard Helms, and the MK Ultra czar, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. What kind of name is that, I wonder? Loners, desperately private men who guarded the secrets of the nation and the secrets of their lives with equal passion. Since the two were so often inextricably intertwined, their training certainly founded on suspicion. In the story, the cat leads Tiltil into a trap in the forest where he is set upon by the trees and the animals and has to fight for his life. He is saved at the last minute by Light, who warns him that, quote, man is alone against all the world, end quote. Finally, the leave-taking occurs. As the hour has grown late and the children return to their cottage miraculously as the clock strikes 8 on Christmas morning, this is the awakening, a constant theme for the CIA and Tavistock. Of course, when they awaken, the children realize that the bluebird has been in their home all along. Through an innocent child's tale, Tavistock brainwashers have embarked on a sacred quest that would lead them into humanity's deepest secrets. By delving into the universal, macrocosmic secrets of the human mind, they hope to uncover the specific microcosmic secrets of their enemies, as above, so below. Very Freemasonic. Very mystical. Tavistock used their understanding of psychiatric methods to formulate and implement an action program based upon such beliefs. Once the neurotic map of each individual was determined, Tavistock was able to set up, quote, filtering mechanism. That is different forms of brainwashing to select various neurotic types and place them in their appropriate settings. There is deeper symbolism involved in all of these Tavistockian processes. Tiltil and Mytil were innocent, virgin children, morally spotless, on an initiatic journey in the company of Light. The men of Bluebird and later MK Ultra could hardly be considered in the same way. From the point of view of the ancient mystery religions whose quest they were imitating, they were plumbing the depths of the abyss without having undergone the period of purification. Thus their sins, their personal, private, specific sins, would come to haunt them in the days and weeks and years that would follow, soiling their reputations and forbidding them entry into the inner temple. Hold on. Sorry. The psychopathic kernel of Tavistock's long-range vision is therefore this. In Campaigner magazine's ICLC Strategic Studies, L. Marcus explains, quote, the fascist structural reforms, local community control, and social contract are the assertion of the unconscious infantile realm at the expense of the relative rationality of former socializing ego ideals. Fascism is the world desired and the paranoid dreams of the id. Conversely, if the automized individual's world is converted into a controlled environment which conforms to such fascist structural reforms, the victim's mind will discover that only its potential paranoid self provides it with the means for agreement with that controlled environment, end quote. On one level, the technique was applied to the world of intelligence, but a far more hideous use was envisioned for it by the practitioners of the art of brainwashing. After the war, these techniques were put back into society and applied to real lives and real people. Tavistock had understood that the family was the most powerful psychoactive agents. One of their creations, quote, therapeutic groups, which we will analyze in this section, provided the opportunity to tap the power of the family. The most advanced among the brutal practitioners of the new industrial psychology was Dr. John Rawlings Rees. Rees discovered that an unreal realm could be created, the social group. An individual is made to transfer his or her identity to the group, wherein they become subjected to the most intense forms of suggestion. Provided the individual's inner sense of real identity is destroyed, he can be manipulated like a child. M. Mendocino, in an article titled, quote, Low Intensity Operations, end quote, explains, quote, a skilled group leader can use the group to create a powerful, albeit artificial, family environment. Once this environment is induced, a therapist can manipulate a member of the group, not by direct attack, but by subtly manipulating the other members of the group, for example, through suggestion. If the victim has been sucked into thinking of the group as something helpful or motherly, then that environment has been manipulated to turn against them. It will tend to have the impact of deep motherly rejection, end quote. Rees and Tavistock understood through their extensive engagement in group work that manipulation based upon bougie conceptions of outside world as magical mother's fears was fundamental to mass control. In other words, the Institute looked for methods by which to manage populations by exploiting their ideology, by first creating numerous social groups and then setting such groups into competition. and making all gains contingent on winning these at the expense of the contingency groups. A self-policing fascist social order could be established. It was merely necessary to atomize the subject population, employing an, quote, armamentarium of sociological and psychiatric weaponry to the effect of so dividing the people against itself, end quote. Setting race against race, language group against language group, women's self-interest against men as oppressors. And we've already seen that happening. Further subdivide them by professional category and so on, and to further subdivide them into small territorial community self-interest groups that the military forces are, quote, never confronted with more than a small material force represented by a hardcore resistant to a generally effective combination of sociological and psychiatric weapons of control, end quote. One of the ways in which such practices were encouraged and used by Tavistock brainwashers involved increasing levels of productivity and the intensification of labor at the expense of one's health. In other words, Rockefeller induced self-motivation destruction of the self, a society of brainwashed zombies content to subsist on the brink of starvation, performing sadomasochistic acts of sodomy for a perceptibility irrational sort of psychotic holocaust. All of it is based on a sort of perverse Dionysian, sodomic, mindless fanaticism within the broader framework of Rees's Rockefeller model of fascist society. Quote, the purpose is to function under a spiraling reduction in standard income and working conditions, end quote. And you are there. We are there, bro. Like, inflation has gone up so high, everything is so effing expensive, and you're still getting paid the same. There is a method to this madness, however. For example, in an environment of downward spiraling standard income and working conditions, higher and higher productivity is, quote, suggested as the group's goal, often at the expense of safety and the psychological well-being of the group members. Anyone who protests is told they are maladjusted. Quote, the idea was to recreate a family dynamic or a dynamic of peer pressure in group therapy where predetermined objectives were forced onto the group through consensus or democracy in the language of these social engineers. The idea was that by attacking someone's sovereign identity in the group, that individual would forfeit their sovereignty to the group and become suggestible to the predetermined objectives, end quote. Such techniques play upon the vulnerable person's guilt, shame, and regret with both sledgehammer and scalpel. Humiliated by the group, with only the unreal realm to judge from, the individual further degrades himself and accepts the verdict. He begins producing more. Yeah, dude, I don't let none of that. Sorry, I can only go as fast as I can go, and I can only do what I can do, and I'm no one's slave. So, and I feel like this is why, like, it used to kind of frustrate me that, like, when, you know, because overall, like, white people are very hard workers, and you would see in any kind of, like, work setting, and this is hashtag not all, but some of the black people will be like, I'm not rushing to do a goddamn thing. And you know what? That is good. The brainwashing was not fucking working on them. Okay. This is the malicious, disgusting kernel of co-participation, quality of life, co-determination, humanization, human relations, or whatever euphemism may be mustered, all under the banner of post-industrial society. A Ford Foundation-sponsored piece of garbage whose particular point as a counterinsurgency weapon of ideology introduced the proto-fascist notion of zero growth. And here we fucking are with Bill Gates pushing the zero growth, net zero, eat the bugs bullshit. It's so anti-human, dude. It's so anti-human. As M. Mendocino explains, quote, the slave labor and death camp system of the Nazis are not quirks of Hitler and his associates, but an intrinsic expression of the fundamental policies of any zero growth economy. And that's where we are in America right now. Zero growth economy. Okay? It is impossible to have zero growth policies beginning today without mass genocide tomorrow. And what have I been fucking saying this whole time? These Jays are going to come for us, and that with their little Noahide laws. They're going to try to unalive a bunch of people for blasphemy and pumpkin for blasphemy and stop. Okay, anyways, I'm going to get off now and I will start again because apparently someone's walking in the door. The child is screaming. The dogs are barking. And let's see. Where were we? Okay. All right. It is impossible to have zero growth policies beginning today without mass genocide tomorrow. Remember that. Sleep on that. Thanks.